Okay, so we are good to go. So today we will continue from yesterday's discussion, starting on the last class discussion, starting with the concept of HTTP proxy. We discussed the very basics of the HTTP protocol in the last class. The HTTP protocol and its secured version HTTPS protocol are the default protocols to access web pages on the internet. Okay, and we discussed how is this actually done typically using GUI based software called browsers, which essentially uh, talks with an HTTP server and displays the information sent back by the server and renders it on the browser window, which you can see on your screen, and you can interact with it through something called dynamic web pages. These dynamic web pages are features where the web pages by themselves have small programs embedded inside them. Typically, a very common language is probably JavaScript, and these programs can be executed by the browsers to give you a custom look and feel. There can be forms where you can fill up information and send this information back to the server. On the server side, this information needs to be parsed, and this parsing can be done in many ways. One of the very popular uh, was way of doing it was something through the Common Gateway Interface, or CGI. And Perl was a very common programming language to do this. I think nowadays it can be done in using many different languages, including probably Python and all these things. However, when we were students, for a large part, for many years, actually, Perl was kind of the de facto standard CGI uh, language. The Perl is a language which is very good at string processing and parsing. Okay, it is built for parsing. A primary goal of Perl is to perform very sophisticated parsing, so it is a very good language for that. Anyways, let us come back to the concept of HTTP proxy. The concept of HTTP proxy is essentially the primary motivation is caching. Okay. What happens is that there is a client which requests, possibly inside a larger internal network, an individual computer, say. I'm saying a computer, but again, these concepts of clients and servers are interchangeable with respect to physical computers or physical devices like smartphones and processes running on some computational platform. Okay, so don't get confused. These are kind of flexible concepts. Suppose there is a client which wants to see the web page at downloads.hipchat.com. Okay, and the top level web page is called block_info.html. And this HipChat client requests there is a web page, okay, but it cannot request the web page directly. In between, there is a proxy server, which is another computer sitting inside it, these two parties. So basically, it first performs a TCP handshake with this proxy server and then requests this thing TCP handshake. By the way, whenever you have these bidirectional arrows, this means that this is a two-way handshake. Although it is shown using one arrow, actually multiple transactions will go through this. Go on. Okay.
Sir, you are not audible.
I think sir has left.
Sorry, I got disconnected. There is some connectivity issues on my side. It's bad network quality is repeatedly showing, and I'm getting disconnected. But anyways, if we share the screen. Okay, hopefully you can see it. So there is a proxy server. Say the name of the proxy server, HTTP proxy server is BARP, which is sitting in between the client HipChat and the primary HTTP server from which information has to be retrieved, and that server is downloads.hipchat.com. So first, the HipChat client performs a TCP handshake with the BARP server. Why did this happen? Well, you can configure your web browser to do this by default. So when you are you can set an option in the web browser that all connections will be through a proxy server. You give the IP address of the proxy server and you mention the port at which this proxy server is listening for connections, which if you remember in IIT Kharagpur, it used to be 172 dot something and the port was 8080. So that you connect first to that proxy server, and then with the proxy server processes your you then your browser requests the proxy server basically to get this web page. Okay, so it issues a HTTP GET command, but actually this proxy server forwards that GET command to the actual server, HTTP server, which is downloads.hipchat.com on your behalf. So the downloads.hipchat.com actually only sees the proxy server. It does not know who is requesting this web page. This is one important aspect of this proxy business. Okay. So downloads.hipchat.com will be unaware that the actual party which is requesting this is HipChat, some HipChat client with a different IP address than the proxy server. He knows he will be able to see the proxy server when the TCP handshake happens, because the proxy server now will initiate a TCP handshake to set up the connection, and then it will issue when the connection is set up an usual GET command, but this GET command is actually on behalf of its HipChat, of the HipChat client. Okay. Then it gets the contents of the blog info, then it closes the TCP connection, and then it sends back the contents of bloginfo.html. When it sends back the connection, usually it would cache a local copy of the web page. Especially for static web pages, this is a big saving of bandwidth, because if later on some other client requests this web page and this is within the time to live field, usually this time to live fields are large for static web pages which do not change that often. In that case, the proxy server does not need to initiate the further connection to the actual server. It can see the GET request and immediately satisfy the client by sending back the web page from its cache. Okay, so caching can be at different levels. Caching can be at a local agent level, local client level, where your browser is caching something. Caching can also be at the proxy server levels, and caching can also be at the servers of the internet service providers, that level. So at every level of your connection, caching is usually done to save bandwidth. This is a very important concept which we also discussed, I believe, in the last class, where there was this conditional GET command that if the page is either it is sent back immediately, okay, it is not expired, or if it's a web browser or the proxy server, whoever is caching the information is not sure, it contacts the web server but using a conditional GET command with additional parameters saying only if the page is not modified, I have the page at this time, the version at this time. Now, only if you have not modified the page beyond this, please send me this back. Those of you who are familiar with the tools like Make, okay, which you have probably used in your compilers lab and maybe in other assignments also, though especially the CSE students. Tools like Make actually aid in the compilation process where there are plenty of different source files. One of the utilities of Make is kind of similar to this. It only compiles those source files into object code which have been modified. Okay, since the last time it was compiled to object code. Otherwise, it does not compile. Okay, so this is kind of similar. You are saving computational effort by not compiling, preferentially compiling something and preferentially not compiling something, or selectively doing it. Here also you are saving internet bandwidth by getting a web page only if it is needed. So this caching is a very, very important aspect. So this is the fundamental way the proxy server works, by satisfying clients who are requesting web pages and sending them back cached versions of them if possible. Okay. Now, the proxy server on your behalf might also do a conditional get with the other server on other side. Okay. So the conditional get that was shown in the previous slides was from a local level from your web browser, but that can also be performed by the proxy server sitting in between you and the actual web browser. Now the question is this the fundamental utility of proxy server? Because you might have got an impression when you have used the proxy server at IIT Kharagpur that the utility is something else. So can any of you answer that? Is caching the primary utility, or what is the primary utility? What are the other utilities of proxy server from your personal experience? What do you think?
Sir, restricting from getting some information.
Yeah,
Anonymity.
so what happens is that although the primary motivation of proxy server is caching, it is also used, and it is used a lot in actually restricting access to information, like one student has answered.
So surveillance.
It is relatively easy to set up a network firewall and filtering policy and implement it at the proxy server. And so you need to implement it on only one server, because you know all connections of machines which are in your network will go through that proxy server. So you just implement it at one place. And so that's a big advantage, or one of the major utilities of proxy servers. It is used to implement filtering and access policies. Now, next, the application that we are going to study is the email application. And we will study two types of protocols. One protocol that is used to transfer mail between something called, okay, let us just see this diagram to explain some technical terms. Okay. The electronic mail works in traditionally, this is the traditional view. Okay. Most of us actually use a slightly different, use emails in a slightly different way. Okay. We use the webmail version where we log into a server. The server presents a form, HTML page, where username and password has to be given. And when a successful authentication happens, the server sends back information which gives the view of an inbox, of my mail inbox, that HTML page is displayed by my browser. I can perform local modifications. I can click on hyperlinks, which brings further information from the server and displays the emails. It can play multimedia content, fetch and play multimedia content in the web browser if the web browser can play that type of content. It can open documents in the web browser if the browser can open documents. Everything is in the emails in the form of certain information is available in a form of in certain form. We'll come to that. And your browser essentially plays a major function in enabling access. But you are not fetching the information directly to your laptop or desktop to read it. What we are, this view that is presented there is the traditional view of email, where you have a dedicated program running on your computing device, which actually fetches a local copy of the information on your device and then processes it. So this can be this can be so many programs are there. Microsoft Outlook, Firefox, Thunderbird, and so many other client programs are there which actually would fetch the message and process it. You also have this app type of things nowadays on mobile devices through which you can directly access the emails. And when you are accessing the same email with from multiple devices, there comes an issue of syncing the actual web server content with the view on these multiple devices. So all these complications we will study. Okay. Because you might do a webmail access directly from your laptop. You might use an app from a mobile device or a tab to access your same ID, Gmail ID, etc. All these complications arise. So we'll come to them. First, let us consider the traditional way in which email used to be done. There is something called a sender user agent. This is a program running dedicated program. This is not the web browser. Okay, this is a dedicated program running on a sender computer. Okay, suppose the email ID connected with that account is sandeepc@csc.itkgp.rnet.in. So this email ID would send an email that this email has to be sent to an email ID at iitg.rnet.in, which is IIT Guwahati. And we will see how this happens. So first you have a sender user agent program that submits the email to the mail server. This mail server is this mail server is located somewhere at csc.itkgp.rnet.in. This is called the message transfer agent. This message transfer agent would take this email and then use a program. Just hold for a moment. This message transfer agent would take this email and use a protocol called SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, to perform a message transfer of this email to a message transfer agent, another mail server located at iitg.rnet.in. Okay. Then here every user registered under this email ID domain of @iitg.rnet.in has a dedicated mailbox where all the incoming emails on his or her behalf is stored. When it is this user sukumar@iitg.rnet.in connects with the message transfer agent, iitg.arnet.in using his receiver user agent program, which is another local program running locally on his computer. This performs a pull request on his mailbox. So one of the important features is that the message transfer agent at iitg.arnet.in would not push the emails that are there which have accumulated in his mailbox voluntarily. It expects that some client would connect to it and would request or pull these emails out of the mailbox into locally to his computer. So then this email would go to the receiver user agent program where the user would be able to read it. Why are these mails shown in envelopes? Well, this is the usual way physical letters are usually delivered. There is an envelope which covers the actual content, and as we will see very soon, in an electronic mail also, in email also, this concept, some similar concept is actually used. Okay, so there are two different types of programs. One is a user agent program which allows people to read and send emails. The same user agent program lets you compose the email and send the email, and also to download the email from your mailbox in the message transfer client and to read it. Now this mailbox might also have a local copy. Okay, so it might also present you a local view depending on the type of program you are using. Have any of you used the Pine program, students? Or have you heard of the Pine program for email access? Just curious to know. Anybody? No. So the Pine is a command line based email access user agent program. Okay, like Microsoft Outlook or something in functionality, only that it is entirely command line based. Okay, and it is still very popular among many people, especially in academia, who prefer to use it. Okay, so once this is clear, we will study the SMTP protocol and some other details also here. Okay, so the message transfer agents are usually system processes running in the background on mail servers. Okay, they automatically move emails through the system from the originator to the recipient. It uses something called a simple mail transfer protocol or SMTP, which are described in RFCs 821 and RFC 8351. They can implement mailing lists, that is an identical copy of the message is delivered to everyone in the list. Okay, they can implement mailboxes to store all the emails received for a user. The primary difference between the way the email is finally delivered, okay, to the receiving client and the way the post office delivers email is in the last phase of this email transfer. In a post office system, a postman usually the postman physically delivers the letter to your house from the post office. So if you consider this message transfer agent to be the post office, this letter will be delivered to you physically at your address in the last step. Here also it is physically delivered, but the only problem is that there is no concept of any postman. You have to request the you have to query the post office. Is there any letter in my name which I have till not now received? Then only the post office will say yes, there is something. Well, I will send it to you by now. It will send it through a postman, or maybe you have to. I mean, you can compare this last delivery to anything. Maybe after you request, some postman goes and delivers it to you, or it it delivers or you go yourself and collect the letter from post office. In fact, that was a case earlier where people used to write letters probably much more frequently, and sometimes if you are eager for a letter, okay, you would physically actually go to the post office in the morning and ask, is there any letter in my name? The post office would say, okay, yeah, there is a letter. You want to take it yourself? And if you are really eager, you would say, yes, please give it to me right now. Otherwise, the postman will deliver it to you, but that will be probably next day or something. So this is possible. One problem with this model is the mailbox model. Okay. The message transfer agent dedicates certain amount of space in the mailbox. Okay. This space is finite. It's not that these mailboxes are very flexible or elastic and they will keep on increasing magically. Okay, all the time. So once this mailbox gets filled, unless somebody user agent connects to it, takes away some email and partially deletes some mail from this mailbox through commands. Of course, you basically what you do is your user agent would now essentially execute some command which will ask the message transfer agent to delete some stuff from the mailbox, essentially like that. But unless you delete something, this message transfer agent does not care that your mailbox has filled up. It only cares about assigning you some space, say 1 GB of mailbox space for each user. And if it has already filled up and you have delivered, you have taken some emails, copied them on your user agent and you are reading it, but you have not physically freed up space on this mailbox on the server, other incoming emails might be quietly rejected to be received by the message transfer agent without informing you. So it might give you warnings other times when you have connecting saying your mailbox, your space is filling up, etc. But this is not always the case, and you might, if you have not connected, if your mailbox is 99.5% full and if you have not connected for 3 days, it might happen that within these 3 days it is actually fills up and you lose some email. So this is a problem actually. Now the message format is described in RFC 5322. This is an envelope containing message header and message body. So there is an envelope containing a header and a body. Typical fields of the header are from, to, CC, BCC, subject, attachment, etc. Then there is a body. Earlier, there was a lot of restriction on what you could send in an email. Only ASCII text was possible, but now there are extensions to it. We will study it now. So the header fields, all of you know this. Some other more or less common ones which we do not bother about, but these are available. These are necessary for message transport is received and return path. So line added by each transfer agent along the route, and return path, it can be used to identify a path back to the sender. Then there can be other fields: date, reply to, message IDs, in reply to, references, keyword, subject. Subject is a common header. Not all of them might be used all the time. Now there is something called MIME. Okay, this is an extension of the emails which allows you to embed other type of information which is not ASCII text in the form of attachments, or to embed stuff inside the message itself. Okay, for example, audio, image, etc. Multimedia also can be embedded inside an email. Okay, so this earlier in ARPANET, the original email that was version that was used on ARPANET, it consisted exclusively of text messages written in English and expressed in ASCII. There was no support for any other language. Only the ASCII 8-bit ASCII was supported, which only had support for this 128 characters, which uses 7 bits, etc. And if there was no way to send even any extended character set for other types of languages. No image, no audio, nothing could be sent. Okay. Now, MIME actually allows you to do it. So there are some additional MIME headers. MIME adds these headers to the existing email headers. These are MIME version, content description, content ID, content transfer encoding, content type, etc. Now we'll come to MIME. Okay, first let us see how a message transfer happens. This is important. Please pay attention and try to understand. The SMTP protocol is used to transfer email from the user agents, okay, to the actually transfer agents, okay, and then between the transfer agents and again to an user agent. So not the final transfer, sorry, not the final transfer, but from starting from the first point till its own user mail agent to the receiving mail agent, this SMTP is used. The last point of transfer, it uses something else. We'll come to it. Okay. Now, how does it happen? Well, the SMTP client initiates a TCP connection. Again, notice a bidirectional arrow. This bidirectional arrow, whenever you will find, this means that this allows information to proceed in both the directions, and probably this connection was set up by exchanging information in both the directions. Okay. So it allows us first it sets up a TCP connection in the SMTP server, okay, which runs at port 25 of its own mail transfer client or agent. Mail transfer, what should you call? What were this called? Mail transfer agents or whatever. Message transfer agent, sorry, the main servers. So this servers is on, it keeps on receiving at port 25 for different clients trying to connect to it. It sends an email. Then the same mail transfer client acts, same mail transfer computer possibly acts as a client, and it sets up a connection with the receiving server, again SMTP server, again running at port 25, and again sets up a TCP connection, uses SMTP to transfer the email. Okay, and finally from this iitg.rnet.in server, these emails can be pulled by the local user agent to receive the email. So that is there. So essentially, email is delivered by having the sending computer establish a TCP connection to port 25 of the receiving computer. Receiving computer in this sense means the receiving server actually. Okay. This is an example of an SMTP session. The C are the commands written by the client, and S are the replies it received from the server. Okay. So there are some commands like hello. Then it says when it receives a request, kind of a reply that yes, that hello has been received. It replies with another hello, the server. Then it says there is a mail from alice@cs.washington. Then the server says okay. Then received to this. It's okay. Then it sends the data. Then it says server says sends the email, end with a dot on a line by itself. Then it sends from line by line, including the header. Okay. So content, look at the content. So this is MIME version 1 from 2, MIME version 1, message ID something. This is not important. Content type, multi-part alternative. Boundary is this. This line is important. This means that there are multiple parts of this Okay, and there are alternative forms. Some is text, maybe some is something else. And the boundary is the string QWERTY, whatever. This long string is defined for this email to be the boundary. What is the boundary? This is the boundary that delimits particular parts of the message. So if some part is text, that would be delimited by this. If some part is something else, that would be delimited by this, etc. Okay, then there is a subject. Earth, orbit, sun, integral number of times. Anyways, forget. Then there is a preamble. The user agent will ignore it. Okay. Then the first, after this double dash, this boundary string is given. This is the boundary string. Why is this the boundary string? Because this was defined to be the boundary string. This boundary string is not constant. This is a random string generated by the user agent software. Okay. This has got no particular significance that, okay, in every message, this has to be the boundary string. No, that's not the case. Then you write that. Then the first is the content type text HTML. Then, so it is kind of writing text directly in HTML encoding. Paragraph, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you, dear bold Bob. So Bob will be in bold. Happy birthday to you. Then there is a blank. Then there is a delimiter, which means that this text HTML portion is finished. Now, the next content type is an external body message. Okay. This is an anonymous FTP which is going to get some messages. Okay. From what is FTP, we'll come to it. It is a protocol to get some file from some remote machine, remote server. What is anonymous FTP? Anonymous FTP is a type of FTP where no login is required. Okay. No login means no credential is required, basically. You know, anybody can retrieve anything. Okay, then this is the site bicycle.cs.washington.edu. You go to the directory pub and there is something called birthday.snd. Okay, so this is actually birthday.sound, which means this is a sound file. Okay, then this what is the description of this sound file? Well, this is an audio, and when it will be transferred, it will be base 64 encoded. So we'll do not need to get into the details of this because this is not a course on web technology. But essentially what happens is when the user agent, if this message is successfully transformed by SMTP to the remote mail server and the receiving user agent retrieves this email into his local computer and opens it using his client, first he will find this text happy birthday wish with the proper formatting, HTML formatting displayed, and then some message, some music will play corresponding to this birthday.snd file. So this birthday.snd file would actually be fetched by the anonymous FTP from some particular location, and then it will be played. So you have seen this concept also probably in electronic greeting cards, etc., sent by your family or friends, where the music can be played or this type of things happen. Okay, so this is an example where formatted text and music was mixed. Of course, this means that this MIME 1.0 version has support for formatted text in HTML formatting, and it has support for music. Okay, and it has support for data transfer using base 64 encoding. Okay. Now we'll go to the final delivery part. The final delivery, the user agent at the receiver side pulls the email from the mail server after login. So till now we have seen the delivery from the sender user agent up to the receiver mail server. Okay, which is shown on this right part of the program, but there is another step. This another step was this final delivery step, step 3. So this is now missing. This is usually done using something called, the most common one is called IMAP, Internet Message Access Protocol version 4 or IMAP v4, which is described in RFC 3501. The email server runs at IMAP server at port 143. It keeps listening to this IMAP request for emails. The user agent runs an IMAP client, whatever, client program, Thunderbird, Microsoft Outlook, whatever you want to use. And then the client connects to the server and issues a mail delivery command. It can also be, I think on Apple also there are this mail and other types of applications which you do. Now, there was an older protocol called Post Office Protocol POP version 3, POP 3, which was an earlier protocol for email delivery. But it is still used. The POP 3 is used where you know that you are going to access your email from only one device. It is guaranteed you will not access email from more than one device. The peculiar feature of POP is that when it retrieves the email from the mail server at the receiver, it physically deletes the mail server from the receiver, physically deletes the mail from that server. So it gets the email on your local, that email onto your computer, no doubt, but it will immediately delete that mail from that server. I think this behavior can be stopped, but this is the default behavior. Okay, some settings can be done to stop this, but the default behavior is it will delete. So this is quite problematic because this means that there is no further copy of that email anywhere other than the device on which you have got that email. This is problematic in two senses. The first problem is that if you ever, the device on which you have the email, if you ever lose that device, or if that device stops functioning or crashes and you cannot retrieve it, then your email is gone. You would never be able to find it unless you have further made copies of it in, say, your local hard drive or something, some portable hard drive or something, or pen drive. That email is gone forever. Secondly, if you have multiple devices which you want to connect to read emails from multiple locations, that is not possible with the default behavior of POP3. Because there is no further email on the server. You can connect to using another device, but then that email has already been gone and it has come to your other device, the device that connected to it first already. Okay. Similarly, you get another email from that server. That email is gone and you use another device to connect to server next, that you will not find it again. So this is clearly unusable in the way we use emails nowadays, where you have multiple devices. We connect to our mail from different locations, from mobile locations, from our home computers, desktops, laptops, tabs, smartphones, you name it. Okay. So in that case, the IMAP 4 is a much better protocol because it does not, first of all, delete the email immediately from your server. It makes a copy of it and sends it to your device. And secondly, a very important property is it syncs the look of the folders and the mail across your devices. So you can use the Gmail app on your device for mail access. Okay, which is fine. But then you can, it's not that any change you make, you send an email from your mobile to your friend, it's not that it will not reflect on another mobile probably which you have, which is connected to the same email ID. Okay, that will also reflect on its app. You just need to, if the app will periodically sync itself with the view at your email server. So email server also immediately reflects it, and all other devices would also sync to that view. And when you physically use the webmail access to the server to log in, okay, say your Gmail account using a normal browser, just a Chrome browser or Firefox browser, and you just connect to it physically to check, you will find that yes, that whatever you did from your mobile device is also reflected there. So this is very, very convenient, and this is the thing we want. So IMAP, of course, has several commands. Your client issues commands, and your server executes, the mail server executes these commands on your behalf. Okay. So it can log in, it authenticates, it can select a folder, it can examine a folder, create a folder, delete a folder, rename a folder. Okay, subscribe, unsubscribe, list. Okay, status, append, check, fetch, search, store, copy, expunge. Okay, remove the messages flagged for deletion, all this, close, log out, all these things are actual commands that are issued by your client, which uses IMAP v4. Okay, any questions, students? Because now we are supposed to move to the last application that we will cover in this first part of the course, this part of the course.
Sir, can you explain how VPN is different from proxy server?
How VPN is different from
Proxy. So, what is the difference?
Oh,
And I think there are a couple of other questions in the chat box.
okay. Let's see. Our institute mail uses POP3. Unlikely. Why
No, sir.
somebody says our institute mail uses POP3?
Uh,
Your institute email would not use POP3. What your client uses, that is the question. What have you configured your client to use? First of
so
all,
I mean,
I have never accessed institute email using anything other than
no,
webmail.
we can configure our Gmail to client to actually fetch emails from institute email ID, and there
Okay.
the only option to use is POP3.
Oh, POP3. Okay. Yeah, I think I won't recommend that then, because it's bad actually. It's bad. I have never done it that way. So yeah. Yeah, which means that Gmail would retrieve the email from the institute IIT KGP dot whatever, some mail server, but then it will delete that mail will get deleted from the server. That's quite bad. Yeah, that might happen. That POP3 is the only interface that is supported by that server. IMAP is difficult to support. It takes up more resource. So if there are thousands and thousands of users, then for a university it is slightly actually difficult to support IMAP for so many users. Google can support it on their Gmail, because Google is a big company with lot of computational resource. So it can support billions of email IDs and IMAP on them. But Okay, so another question is, why are you using a different message transfer protocol on receiving end and to pull mail requests from the message transfer agent? Because the two operations are completely different. The final delivery part is, see, SMTP is a push type protocol where when a mail is present, it is pushed to the next destination, either from the sender user agent to its local mail server, and then from its local mail server to a remote mail server, depending on the receiver's email ID. So why this operation happens, and that happens, this user agent, this say the sender user agent proactively sets up a TCP connection initially and then sends it. Similarly, your local message transfer agent or local mail server proactively sets up a TCP connection because it is its urge to send this email to the remote message transfer agent. The final delivery cannot be a push type delivery because the first of all your remote message transfer agent or remote mail server, this say iitg.arnet.in, this has no information about your current IP address. The email email has sender addresses, but it does not have any IP address for the of the receiving machine. The email only has sender and receiver email addresses. That text is not connected to an IP address because it does not make any sense to connect them to IP addresses, probably. Because you see, the computer at which this user sukumar@iitg.arnet.in will log in to access his email is not constant. So it is not possible for the mail message transfer agent to look for you everywhere in the entire campus-wise network. Where are you present? And where will it send it? First of all, where will it send it? It needs, there is a confidentiality part. Okay, it cannot just send an email to a public folder, publicly accessible shared folder of a random computer anywhere. So it just keeps the mail safe inside its mailbox, inside the user's mailbox, until the user by his own accord, out of his own urge, connects to it and gets the email. Which seems to be the more secure policy, because it is not randomly throwing away this message. This receiving mail server is not randomly throwing away these emails after it is receiving it. It is responsibility keeping it stored inside itself till the user comes and gets it for himself. Till the user first of all has to authenticate that he is the actual user. Only then he can access his mailbox. Random person, otherwise a random person will go to the post office or go to the bank and say, I am that person, please, this is the check. Please, I want to withdraw some money from that person's account. No, the bank will not allow that. It will authenticate. It will authenticate your face with the photograph that they have in their account records. It will authenticate the signature you do on the withdrawal form or on the check with the signature they have in their records. Only then they will give you the cash. Okay, but this means that the fundamental nature of the final delivery protocol is a pull delivery protocol. It's not a push type delivery protocol. So given this and the many other aspects, okay, of this syncing it with many other devices who simultaneously want to connect to a single mail server, all these things mean that the SMTP protocol and the final delivery protocol are considerably different from each other. Okay. Okay, then the question that we started with, what is the difference between VPN and proxy? VPN is a completely different animal. Okay, I don't think we'll be able to cover VPN is in this course. VPN uses something called network layer security. Okay, it uses something called IPsec, which we will not go into it in this course. We'll not have time. Not that it's an important topic, but it's a network security topic, and I don't think we'll have time to go through it. VPN gives between two parties, okay, two remote computers. It creates a secure channel in a sense that all the communication that will happen between these two parties will happen using in an encrypted mode. Okay, and it will happen at the network layer. Initially, there is an authentication. And when that authentication succeeds, these parties exchange certain keys for that session. Essentially, it exchanges some master keys from which several keys are derived for that session. And then those keys are used for further processing of or transfer of encrypted information between these parties. Proxy is slightly different. Proxy, the proxy concept, nothing was said about the encryption of these informations between the proxy server and the remote server. This can be HTTP also. HTTP is unencrypted transport layer protocol. I mean, it's an application layer protocol which uses unencrypted. There is no encryption. So plain text communication. Everybody can read that a TCP handshake is happening between HipChat and Barp, and then this GET, this page has been requested, and then this proxy and this is doing this. Okay, proxy server can also implement HTTPS requests like you have done regularly when you were in IIT, right? You were accessing e-banking, you were accessing Amazon, you were accessing Gmail, any website you use nowadays will use HTTPS. So that is also possible, but it's not mandatory. And another thing is the proxy server, it only probably cares about the security of its or the behavior of the parties inside its network. So the stuff on the left. VPN is something which provides security to both the parties on the two sides. Okay. VPN is a different concept. VPN and proxy are not or are not the same. Okay, VPN is called tunneling. You create an encrypted, completely encrypted channel in an insecure environment. So the network over which your traffic will transfer is still insecure, but nobody would be able to touch or understand anything of the information that is getting transferred between the two parties if there is a successful VPN connection between them in that session. VPN is typically used by organizations. VPN accounts are login credentials and special software are distributed to the parties. You have to install this VPN software on your local computers, and then you can use it remotely to access the internal networks of your organization. Very, very common in work from home situations among companies nowadays. Okay. Okay. So we will meet tomorrow and finish this concept of FTP, file transfer protocol, which is the last application we will study, and then move on to transport layer. Thank you. I'm stopping the recording now.